My name is Rowan Hale. I'm 29, and 10 years ago my parents stopped answering my calls because I wouldn't sign the dotted line that would have made my future belong to them. I still remember the color of the sky that afternoon. Flat, midsummer gray, as my dad slid a pen across our chipped kitchen table and said I could either be part of the team or learn the lesson life wasn't kind enough to teach me yet. I was 19, skinny, and scared of everything except letting someone else carry my name like a leash. Mom folded her arms, quiet the way a door is quiet right before it slams. "We can't keep helping you if you're going to keep making it hard," she said, which sounded like concern but felt like a verdict. I slid the pen back. Dad stood. And just like that, 10 years of birthdays, holidays, and "we're doing what's best for you" evaporated into an ice-cold silence. When the front door shut behind me, I heard the lock turn with a click I've thought about every day since. If you asked anyone in my town to describe the Hale family back then, they'd use words like driven and close-knit, as if those were synonyms for tight-fisted and single-lane. My father, Greg, loved to remind people he was the first in his line to build something from scratch. He started as a contractor swinging a hammer and grew that into a small property company with a polished website and steel letters on a rented office wall. The thing is, he never learned the difference between holding people to a standard and holding people by the throat. My mother, Lila, could turn any conversation into a test. "How hard are you working? What's next? When will it be bigger?" She dressed her ambition in soft sweaters and matching earrings, but it was just my father's voice delivered with a smile. My younger sister, Harper, learned early how to catch their light and reflect it back. She was the pretty one with soft hair and the laugh that made adults melt. When she said she wanted something, it didn't sound like a request. It sounded like the world catching up to her schedule. Growing up, help in our house had fine print. When Dad paid for something, he expected regular progress reports, gratitude stated aloud, and a willingness to step in line when called. When Mom supported you, it came with reminders about optics, what people would think if you didn't do X or if you insisted on Y. I learned to watch how much space I took up at the table, how much air my sentences used. Harper never had to learn any of that. She stretched, yawned, and the room widened to fit. The pen my father slid across the table that afternoon was for a loan he wanted me to take out in the family's name. He had a plan. He said I would be the student on paper, the leverage in practice. He would buy 2 small rentals near campus using my clean credit and my enrollment status to qualify for some program he'd learned about from a guy at Rotary. My name would be on everything, so the banks would like the story, but he'd handle the details. All I had to do was sign, smile, and not ask questions. The numbers he drew in my notebook looked confident, the arrows clear, the boxes tidy. But every instinct in me knotted up. I'd seen enough of his plans to know how they worked. The wins were his, the risks were mine, and any fallout became a lecture about loyalty. "I want to do this on my own," I said, and for a second my father stared at me like the words were in a language he didn't recognize. Then he laughed. Not the whole belly, just the part that says what a ridiculous idea. "There's no such thing," he told me, tapping the page with the back of the pen. "Everybody is on somebody's shoulders. You want to pretend otherwise, you can go rent your independence somewhere and see how long before it comes due." Mom's mouth folded into that small, disbelieving smile. Harper, 17 then and already rehearsing for a life where she never had to carry a wallet, watched me with a kind of polite pity, like I'd dropped a tray in a crowded cafe and she was too well-bred to clap. When I left, I had a backpack, a used laptop that creaked when it opened, and a mix of anger and helium inside my ribs. I got a job that paid less than everything cost. Then I got another one for nights and weekends. People talk like hard work is noble. Sometimes it's just the only way to keep the lights on. But you learn things in fluorescent kitchens and loading docks. You learn how to read faces and invoices, how to stack boxes so they don't topple, how to call a stranger sir even when he's wrong, and how to stretch a mistake into a lesson before it eats your paycheck. Most of all, you learn the difference between someone investing in you and someone investing in your obedience. That difference became my religion. The first year was the loudest in my head. Every time I wanted to quit, I saw my father's hand pushing a glass across a table with that little flourish he thinks is charm. Every time I wanted to give in and call home, I pictured my mother composing a speech about how sometimes love looks like saying, "We told you so." I didn't attend Thanksgiving that year. No one noticed. Or if they did, they turned it into a parable about choices. Harper posted photos with captions about family and gratitude and her favorite pie. I double-shifted and fell asleep to the sound of my upstairs neighbor's TV. It's funny what you can get used to when you've decided embarrassment is cheaper than debt. 2 years in, I got my first good break. It didn't look like luck. It looked like an older man at the back of a code boot camp with a quiet voice and a scar along his chin saying he needed someone to help him digitize his wife's small business records. He paid by the hour, less than he should have, more than I could refuse, and in exchange I got access to a problem I didn't know I loved solving. Numbers can be a language. Paperwork can be a story. If you stare long enough, patterns appear, and with a little care, those patterns can become policies that stop people from bleeding money through invisible cuts. After that, there were more small businesses. Then there was a broker who liked how I documented things. Then there was a landlord who liked how I didn't flinch when he put a pile of mismatched lease agreements on a table and said, "Can you make it make sense?" I learned zoning maps and inspection schedules like they were puzzles. I learned to never be the loudest person in a room where money was changing directions. People will tell you that success heals old wounds. It doesn't. It covers them. It rewraps them in something tasteful. It distracts you. The feelings still live there, chewing slowly. The way my father's face sharpened when I said no. The way my mother looked past me as if I were a hallway, not a son. The way Harper tilted her head when she was deciding whether to be kind or funny at my expense. When checks started coming to my mailbox with commas inside them, I caught myself wanting to send a photo to a number that never answered. I didn't. Instead, I bought silence. The quiet you get when your rent is paid on time and your car starts without argument. I stacked that quiet until it felt like a floor. Then I learned how to buy something else. Time. I didn't go home for 9 years. Not once. If you asked why, I'd give a practical answer. Schedules, flights, a project. But the truth is simpler. It's hard to enter a house where your absence has been edited into a choice that made everyone else's life easier. I heard about Harper through other people's photos. She graduated in a white dress and held roses. She started working with our mother at a boutique firm that helps curate events for donors and development causes. The caption said she was building connections. I recognized that phrase. In my family, it always meant borrowing ladders without asking who owned them. Then, a year ago, a heavy envelope arrived at the forwarding address I use for most of my mail. It had my name written in that rounded, teacherly script my mother uses for Christmas tags. Inside was a save-the-date card for Harper's wedding. The paper was thick enough to feel like it came with instructions. The front had a photo of my sister and a man with shoulders that belonged to a suit. He had that bland, competent look of someone who never felt the edge of a month in his entire life. The back had a date, a location, and a line that said, it would mean the world to have family there. No one's number was included. No note. Just the assumption that if you mailed the moon, it would show up on your porch and say thank you. I set the card on my counter and stared at the venue's name. I knew it. Not socially. Professionally. The building had changed hands 3 times in 6 years and leaked money every season like a roof collects leaves. Each owner believed the previous owner's story. That the place was special, that weddings done there felt cinematic, that people would pay extra just to say their photos happened under those rafters. The problem was simpler. The bookings were inconsistent, the township was prickly about parking, and the main hall's electrical system was a patchwork of temporary fixes. It needed someone to stop believing its myth long enough to fix its bones. I had looked at it once early on. It wasn't the right time, but I remembered the smell of the wood, the way the lights softened along the brick in late afternoon. Some places have a heartbeat, even when they limp. Harper's invitation sat on my counter for 2 weeks. I told myself I wasn't going. I told myself I was too old to audition for a role I didn't want. Then I had a week where nothing seemed to fit. The meetings were fine. The money was fine. The emails had the tone of people who wanted to be pleased. But every night I went home and the silence felt borrowed again, not bought. I'm not proud of what I did next. I typed my sister's name into social media and scrolled through her life like a stranger. Engagement photos on a dock. Coffee in the mornings with captions about this season. A ring that could pay for a small used car. And in the comments, My mother telling her how proud she was, how grown, how beautiful, how everything we always dreamed. The "we" hooked me in the ribs like a question mark. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman with a cordial voice from the venue asked if I might be interested in consulting. They'd heard my name from a planner whose friend had worked with me on another project. "We're trying to get through a busy summer," she said, "and our margins keep disappearing." I told her I had a little time. We scheduled a visit. Walking back into that space felt like stepping into a memory someone else kept watered. The main hall was warm, the air faintly sweet from last night's flowers, and half the staff were working with the nervous energy of people who love what they do even as they know they could do it better with a few less fires. The owner, a man in his late 50s with a polite smile and tired eyes, shook my hand like he wanted to believe in somebody again. We walked the hall. I asked questions. I took notes. I listened to the way the floorboards talked back. By the time we reached the overlook where couples take photos at sunset, I had a list in my head that turned into a plan on paper later that night. I won't lie and say it wasn't a kind of poetry when the work became something else. The owner hinted he might be open to a partnership. A month later, after we'd swapped spreadsheets and quiet worries and we'd both had a blunt conversation with the township about parking, he said the other thing aloud. If the right person wanted to take this on fully, I'd sell. Deals like that are less about numbers than trust. You're taking responsibility for somebody's letters and somebody's weekends and the headaches that can't be logged. I told him I only do it if I can actually fix what's broken. He nodded like a man who wanted to sleep through the night more than he wanted to win an argument. We shook hands. We drew up contracts with more pages than a short book. It wasn't simple. It wasn't cheap. But sometimes life hands you a chance to put your fingerprints on a place where other people make their happiest decisions. And if you're careful, you can make the building strong enough to hold them. Which is how I ended up with a save the date on my counter and a set of keys in my pocket to the very hall my sister had picked for her big day. The irony tasted so sharp it almost made me laugh. I didn't. Instead, I sat with it until it became something heavier and more useful. It wasn't revenge. Not then. It was stewardship. It was work. But it was also a door that hadn't existed before. The chance to show up on my own terms, without asking permission from people who taught me that love required proof of obedience. I RSVP'd yes, online with the same steady hands I used to sign a wire. I didn't hear from my parents beforehand. Not a text. Not a looking forward to seeing you. If anything, I could feel them writing the story in their heads. Rowan, the wandering older brother, surfaces for a free meal and a photo while the real family celebrates a real accomplishment. I let them have their story. I finished a late-night walk through 2 weeks before the wedding and stood in the empty hall alone. The floors gleamed. The pendant lights hummed. A storm knocked at the roof like polite knuckles. I thought about my father's pen on our kitchen table. I thought about my mother's silence, her tilted head when she was deciding whether to rescind or deliver approval. I thought about Harper's easy smile and the comfort of an aisle built just for her. The morning of the wedding, I woke before my alarm. My suit hung from the closet door like a promise I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I drove slowly. There's a particular feeling when you approach a building that belongs to you in one way and to everyone else in another. I parked around back out of habit and walked through the service entrance, nodding to the staff. The on-site manager, who knows me by a different title than owner on busy days, gave me a quick update about the schedule, the weather, the decorator's last-minute request for more candles. "You staying for the ceremony?" she asked. I shrugged. "I'm family," I said, and the word felt both fragile and sharp, like glass. I texted the number on Harper's invitation to let them know I'd arrived. A perk of being the building's boss is that you can make sure the people you want safe are safe. 20 minutes later, I walked around the side corridor toward the family suite, passing staff ferrying bouquets like treasure. I hesitated at the door and listened. Laughter, the kind that swirls around names. I knocked, and when Mom opened the door, the first thing she did was glance at my shoes, then my tie, then the space over my shoulder as if I might have brought responsibility along like a date. "Rowan," she said finally, and inside my name was a small astonishment, followed by the calculation of what it would mean. Harper looked perfect. She really did. I say that without bitterness. Some people are built for center stage and don't abuse it. She walked to me in a cloud of tulle, and hugged me lightly so her makeup wouldn't argue. "You made it," she said. "Of course," I answered. And then the room arranged itself around me into the old pattern. Mom asking logistics questions as if that were affection. Dad hovering in the background the way he does when he's deciding whether to offer wisdom or a wager. He waited until other people's attention shifted and then drifted closer. "Big day," he said, as if he weren't assessing me like a fixture. His eyes skimmed over my suit to my watch, then to the window, as if the view might grade me. "How are you, son?" The word son had edges. I told him I was well and asked him the same. He gave a thumbs up that meant nothing and everything. Then someone called for photos, and the moment broke. If you've ever been near a wedding, you know the hours before the ceremony are a machine. Everyone's heart strapped to a schedule. I slipped out of the family suite and let the day roll. There were hugs and smiles that felt like souvenirs I didn't know where to put. There was the photographer's bright voice, the string quartet rehearsing, the caterer's controlled panic about desserts. I lurked where staff lurk, in the places guests never see. A few of the people I employ nodded at me in that private way that says we are aligned without saying why. I kept my role quiet because some truths work best at the right temperature. The ceremony was beautiful. I stood toward the back and listened to vows about choosing each other every day. I watched my mother's face fold and unfold like a sail. I watched my father blink against feelings he considers unproductive. When they kissed, the room exhaled. Confetti clicked softly against the floorboards I'd fought to seal last fall. The band eased into something hopeful. People clapped. For a second I forgot every history between us and let the sweetness be real. Then the crowd swelled toward cocktails and habit returned. I checked the flow, the bottlenecks, the way the staff moved like practiced dancers around corners that used to pinch. None of them needed me. That might have been the nicest thing anyone had ever given me. Dinner started under the pendant lights with a clink of silverware and the way joy concentrates in the space between plates. I took my assigned seat at a corner table, third row, not family, not exile, close enough to be in the photos if someone wanted a wide angle, far enough to be cropped. Harper and her new husband looked deliriously tired, which is the correct way to look when you've been busy promising your life to someone. During the salad course, Dad stood to circulate like a mayor. I watched him lean into conversations, hand on shoulder, smile calibrated to suggest he has been benevolent all along. When he reached my table, he rested his palm against the back of my chair and said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear, "There he is, our world traveler." People laughed the kind of laugh that signals good faith. He leaned closer. "You still renting, Rowan? You keeping the dream nimble?" His mouth smiled. His eyes kept score. I could feel the room shift by a degree, curiosity tilting toward us like flowers toward light. Mom, 2 tables away, looked over just in time to offer a smile that was not a rescue. Harper was laughing at something a friend said, unaware. The band softened into a song that left more space for voices. My father swirled his wine like punctuation and waited for my answer. I could have told him something harmless. I could have nodded and let his story about me slide into place, frictionless. Instead, I slid my hand into my jacket pocket and felt cold metal shaped like a question I've been carrying for weeks. I turned the key ring against my palm until the edges stopped feeling like a secret and started feeling like a choice. Then I stood up slowly, and the scrape of my chair against the floor made a sound that brought 3 more faces around. And before I could decide how to deliver the sentence that had been living under my tongue since spring, my father lifted his glass, eyes bright with that familiar, polished smirk, and said, "Still renting, huh?" My dad's voice carried just far enough that a few people chuckled politely, not sure if it was a joke or a jab. He loved that gray zone, where cruelty could be dressed as humor. His glass hovered in the air like a gavel. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat back down, sliding the keys deeper into my pocket. The moment wasn't ripe yet. He smirked, as if my silence proved his point, and turned to the man across the table. Rowan always had, how do you put it, a free spirit. He chuckled. Never wanted to do the hard work. Likes to keep things flexible. Rent one place, rent another. No roots, no stability. But hey, some people are just built that way. The man nodded awkwardly, his fork pausing over his plate. The tension at the table thickened, but Dad basked in it. He leaned back, draping his arm over his chair. Harper, though, he continued loudly, she's different. Solid. reliable, always had a plan, always moving forward. Now look at her, married, stable, beautiful home waiting for her. He raised his glass toward Harper, who smiled uncertainly, probably too busy enjoying her night to parse the undertones. I could feel the same old script unfolding, the one I'd heard since I was a kid. Me, the wandering disappointment. Harper, the golden child. Dad, the wise narrator casting the roles. My mother, across the room, caught my eye. She gave a faint smile and tilted her head, the same gesture she used when I was 10 and brought home a B+ on a test. That "don't embarrass us" look, the one that asked me to accept the role they'd assigned. The table buzzed softly with conversations resuming, but my father wasn't done. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that it felt intimate while still being audible to the people around us. "You know, Rowan, we were worried about you. You're not getting any younger. No wife, no kids, no home. What are you working toward, really?" His tone was coated in fake concern, but his eyes glittered with victory. He'd baited me in front of an audience, just the way he liked it. Before I could answer, Harper's new husband chimed in, trying to smooth things over. "Come on, Greg. Everyone moves at their own pace." But Dad waved it off, chuckling again. "Sure, sure. But you can't live like a teenager forever. At some point, the real world knocks, and you need to answer." I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. The old urge returned, to defend myself, to explain everything I'd built, the hours, the grind, the deals. But I knew better. Explanations only gave him more rope to pull tighter. Across the room, I saw my mother laughing with one of Harper's friend's parents, her hand resting proudly on Harper's shoulder. They looked like a portrait of what she always wanted: one perfect daughter, one successful family. And me? I was just a guest in their painting. Dinner rolled on, but the little barbs didn't stop. When the waiter poured wine, Dad smirked and said, "Better savor it, Rowan. This is the good stuff. Not what you're used to." When Harper opened gifts, Mom said sweetly, "We're so proud of you, honey. Always knew you'd make us proud." Her eyes slid over me, unspoken but sharp, unlike someone else. Each little moment stacked on top of the last. The laughter, the dismissive glances, the careful framing of Harper as the perfect child while I sat in the shadows. They weren't screaming. They didn't need to. Their talent had always been making cruelty look like concern, making me the punchline of a joke only they laughed at. By dessert, my father was holding court again, bragging about Harper's new house, the neighborhood, the square footage. "Real property," he said, raising his glass once more. "Something you can stand on. Not just paper and promises." His eyes flicked to me like a knife. I tightened my grip on the keys in my pocket, feeling the weight of metal against my palm. Not yet, I thought, but soon. And just as the room quieted for toasts, my dad stood again, this time with a deliberate smile. He clinked his glass, looked straight at me, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen." My dad's voice boomed over the clinking of forks and low hum of conversation. "If I could have your attention." The room gradually quieted. The band softened their playing. Guests turned toward him, glasses lifted halfway, expectant smiles plastered across faces. He stood tall, confident, savoring the spotlight like it was owed to him. He cleared his throat with a theatrical pause. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating Harper and her new husband, though of course, they are the stars of the evening. It's also a chance for family to come together, to reflect on what matters most." His eyes slid toward me, the corners of his mouth curling as if he were holding back a secret. I knew that look. My gut twisted. He went on, his words heavy with syrup and steel. "You know, when you raise kids, you do your best to guide them. Sometimes one child listens. One child honors the lessons, carries on the family name with pride." He lifted his glass toward Harper, who smiled shyly, though I noticed a flicker of unease in her eyes. And sometimes, he turned, the weight of his gaze falling on me. Sometimes the other thinks he knows better. He runs off, makes mistakes, chooses, well, a different path. The crowd tittered politely, unsure whether to laugh. My chest tightened. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. And here we are 10 years later. Dad continued, voice rising as if he were delivering a sermon. One child standing tall on her wedding day, surrounded by family, love, stability. And the other? Still wandering, still renting. The word landed like a stone. He let the pause hang, then chuckled, sipping his wine. But that's life, isn't it? Some choices pay off. Some don't. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. I wanted to stand up, to shout, but I froze, every muscle locked. My mother gave a delicate laugh, shaking her head as though to soften his cruelty. "Oh, Greg, don't be so hard," she said, her voice dripping with mock chastisement. But her eyes sparkled with agreement. Then came the part that burned the deepest. Dad gestured toward me with his glass, raising his brows. "But we love Rowan anyway. He's always been the dreamer. We kept him afloat longer than we should have, God knows. Paid his way, gave him chance after chance. But hey, that's what parents do, right? You can't save everyone from themselves." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the tables. My heart dropped like a stone into water. He'd just laid out our family's private history like entertainment, rewriting it in real time, making me the charity case, the burden, the black sheep who squandered their generosity. Harper's new husband shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on hers. She looked torn, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but her silence was louder than any defense. The betrayal wasn't just in his words. It was in the way Mom smiled as though this was all in good fun, in the way Harper stayed quiet to protect her perfect day, in the way the guests nodded politely and sipped their drinks to smooth over the tension. They all sat there while my father dismantled me in public, reducing my years of sacrifice and hard work to a caricature of failure. My fingers closed tight around the keys in my pocket, digging into the metal so hard I felt the edges bite my skin. Rage simmered, but under it, something colder settled in. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was a line crossing, a torching of whatever fragile thread of respect might have still existed between us. I forced myself to stay still, my lips pressed into a thin line as the toast ended with laughter that wasn't laughter at all. It was people trying to move past discomfort. Dad sat back down, smug, basking in his performance. The room picked up again, chatter resuming, forks scraping plates. But to me, the night had shifted. Something broke clean through, and I knew in that moment there was no going back. And then, as if to twist the knife, my mother leaned across the table, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. "You could have had all of this, Rowan. If only you'd listened." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just favoritism or cruelty. It was betrayal, through and through. They hadn't just cut me off 10 years ago. They had erased me. And now, they were parading the erasure as proof of their righteousness. I swallowed hard, every nerve in me screaming. The time for silence was ending. Soon, very soon, I'd show them what listening to myself had really built. But first, I let them believe they'd won. I didn't taste a single bite of dessert. The room blurred in waves of clinking silverware and polite laughter while I sat perfectly still, my hand wrapped around the stem of my glass, so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. My father's words looped in my head on repeat, each replay heavier than the last. We kept him afloat longer than we should have. The way he'd said it, casual, almost generous, reduced every sleepless night, every double shift, every sacrifice I had made to nothing more than their kindness. It wasn't just humiliation. It was erasure. He had rewritten my story in front of an audience, and no one stopped him. Not my mother, who just smiled tightly as though his cruelty was tradition. Not Harper, who, despite the flicker of discomfort in her eyes, chose silence over disruption. And not the guests, who nodded along, because polite people don't intervene when family puts one of their own on a spit and turns them slowly. I excused myself halfway through the coffee course. The room was too warm, and I couldn't breathe beneath the weight of the polite glances, the subtle pity. I slipped out into the corridor, past a waiter carrying a tray of champagne, and leaned against the cool brick wall just outside the main hall. My reflection stared back at me in one of the glass doors, suit perfectly pressed, expression unreadable, but eyes red at the edges. I hadn't cried in years. Not since that day I walked out at 19 with nothing but a backpack and a vow to myself. But standing there in the quiet, with laughter echoing from the hall, I felt something close to it rise in my chest. It wasn't weakness. It was grief. The grief of realizing that no matter what I accomplished, to them, I would always be the boy who failed to bend. For a moment, I considered leaving. Just walking out into the night, starting the car, and driving until the venue was nothing more than headlights in the rearview mirror. Let them have their narrative. Let them believe I was too ashamed to stay. I pictured my father, swirling his glass in smug satisfaction, my mother shaking her head as if I'd proven her right, Harper resuming her smiles because that was easier than defending me. If I left, they'd never know what I'd built. The thought twisted something deep inside me. I pressed my palms against the wall, forcing air into my lungs. That's what they wanted. To silence me. To turn me invisible again. To make me believe that all I had was survival, not victory. A faint shuffle of footsteps interrupted my spiral. One of the staff, a young server with nervous eyes, paused when she saw me in the corridor. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked gently. She didn't know who I was. To her, I was just another guest. "Yes," I said after a pause, straightening. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Everything's fine." She nodded, hesitated as if she wanted to say more, then hurried back toward the kitchen. I slipped my hand back into my pocket, feeling the keys again. Cold, solid, real. That tiny ring of metal was the only anchor I needed. They didn't know. Not yet. To them, I was still the failure, the renter, the dreamer who never grew up. But I had something they couldn't take from me, something they couldn't rewrite with speeches or pitying smiles. I stayed outside until my heartbeat slowed, until the ache in my chest became a slow burn instead of a raw wound. Then I walked back in, head high, slipping into my seat like nothing had happened. My father gave me a smug little nod, as if he thought I'd slunk off to lick my wounds. My mother avoided eye contact. Harper caught my gaze for the briefest moment, then looked away. I said nothing. I ate nothing. I let them believe they'd won. But as the night pressed on, I started to see it differently. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a stage. They had chosen to put me under the lights, strip me down in front of an audience. They thought they'd written the ending already. But what they didn't realize was that I had the final line waiting in my pocket, glinting with promise. For now, though, I played the part they expected, silent, diminished, the brother who didn't belong. Let them lean back in their chairs, smug and satisfied. Let them toast Harper and her perfect future. Because when the curtain lifted again, I'd be ready. The night of Harper's wedding left me hollow, but also sharpened. When I drove home afterward, headlights stretching down empty roads, I replayed every word of my father's toast, every glance from my mother, every silence from Harper. It burned, yes, but fire can harden. By the time I reached my driveway, the humiliation had calcified into something steadier, resolve. I threw myself back into work the next morning. That's always been my language. Building, refining, making systems run smoother. The venue deal I had struck a few months prior wasn't just some vanity project or nostalgic whim. It was a cornerstone. Weddings may look like flowers and champagne on the surface, but beneath all that is structure. Contracts, logistics, liability, and endless numbers. Numbers I understood like second nature. Within the first 6 months of ownership, I cut costs by almost a third without laying off a single staff member. I renegotiated supplier contracts, installed a new booking system, and brought in a local architect to tackle the parking issue that had plagued the venue for years. Word began to spread that the old money pit of a hall was turning into the most reliable venue in the county. Couples who once dismissed it as too risky started lining up, and planners whispered my name as the one who made the place actually work. But the venue was just one piece. The consulting work I'd been doing quietly for years blossomed into something larger than I'd anticipated. Small business owners referred me to their friends, who referred me to developers, who referred me to city planners. One contract turned into 3, then 10. Before long, I wasn't just fixing books and leases, I was advising entire redevelopment projects. A district that had been written off as too far gone came back to life, brick by brick, with my fingerprints on the paperwork that made it possible. Money began flowing in ways I'd once thought impossible. At first, I spent cautiously, almost guiltily, paying off debts, setting up reserves, making sure I'd never feel the cold grip of scarcity again. But eventually, I allowed myself a few things. A home of my own, not lavish, but with wide windows that let in morning light. A car that didn't stall at intersections. Time, sweet, precious time, to wake up without panic gnawing at my stomach. Still, I kept quiet about it all. I didn't post glossy photos online. I didn't call my parents or send updates. I stayed invisible, letting them believe their story about me remained true. Their silence toward me became an armor, a shield that kept my growth mine alone. Every ignored birthday, every unanswered holiday, every Christmas card that never came. It only carved the space where my independence rooted deeper. There were moments, though, when I caught glimpses of their world through secondhand whispers. A family friend would mention how Harper had landed another big client with Mom's firm, or how Dad was talking up the perfect son-in-law at some gathering. Not once did my name surface, except as a cautionary tale, a shadow in their golden narrative. And oddly enough, I let them keep it, because while they clung to their fiction, I was building something real. I didn't just rise financially, I grew stronger personally. I learned how to walk into a room full of men like my father, men who thought dominance equaled respect, and outlast them. I learned patience, the kind that waits out storms and opportunists alike. I even learned how to enjoy solitude, not as loneliness, but as sovereignty. 1 year turned into 3. 3 turned into 5. By the time Harper's wedding anniversary rolled around, I had quietly expanded into multiple ventures, the venue thriving, my consulting firm running with a full staff, and a small real estate portfolio under my management. I had partnerships with city officials who once wouldn't have returned my emails. And every contract, every property, every successful event layered onto the same foundation. I no longer owed anyone permission to exist. Yet despite all of it, one thought persisted in the back of my mind. They still believed I was nothing. My father still held court at dinner parties, I was sure, talking about the son who never grew up. My mother still shook her head and sighed if my name came up. Harper still played along with the silence, comfortable in her place as the chosen one. They didn't know. Not yet. And maybe that was why, when the next family gathering surfaced on the horizon, another celebration, another spotlight, I didn't decline the invitation. This time, I felt no dread. This time, I felt something else entirely, anticipation. Because they had built a story with me as the failure. But I had been busy writing my own ending. It was late autumn when the first real crack in my family's picture-perfect wall appeared. The leaves outside my office window had turned the color of copper pennies, and I was reviewing a redevelopment proposal when a familiar name slid across my desk, Hale Properties. My father's company. The report was blunt: mismanagement, over-leveraged loans, properties sitting vacant. It was all couched in polite business language, but I didn't need anyone to translate. The empire my dad loved to brag about at barbecues was crumbling quietly beneath him. The kind of collapse that doesn't make the news but whispers through bank offices and city councils, turning into a weight no amount of charm can lift. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, and let the realization settle. For years, he'd lorded over me with stories of ownership, stability, real property. Now the truth was in black and white. He was slipping. And worse for him, I was in a position to see the entire unraveling. That same week, the venue hosted a charity gala for the local hospital, a polished event, full of the kind of donors who measure each other by square footage and last names. I moved through the room quietly, shaking hands, listening more than I spoke. At one point, the mayor's aide leaned in and said, "Rowan, your work downtown has made our lives a lot easier. You've turned things around in ways most thought impossible." Compliments like that didn't inflate me anymore. They solidified something steadier: influence. Later that evening, while watching the guests dance under the golden lights, I overheard two planners talking about my mother and Harper's firm. Apparently, they were struggling too, losing clients to younger, fresher companies who didn't cling to outdated practices. "They still think their name is enough?" one of the planners whispered with a laugh. But times change. People want results, not just appearances. It hit me then. All those years they dismissed me as a failure. They had been rotting from within. The foundation they stood on was cracked, and they hadn't even noticed. Over the next months, I began gathering threads. Not maliciously at first, just out of habit, the way I've always studied systems. I looked deeper into Hale Properties filings. I spoke with city contacts who let slip that Dad had burned bridges with inspectors. I listened to planners complain about Mom's cold approach and Harper's entitlement in meetings. Everywhere I turned, the cracks widened. And quietly, without anyone realizing, I positioned myself to catch what they dropped. When a block of commercial spaces my father once bragged about owning went into foreclosure, my firm was one of the first to get the call. We didn't buy them directly. Not yet. But we structured the deal, advised the buyer, and set terms that put me squarely in control of the management contract. Each step was deliberate, each move made with patience. I didn't need to announce anything. The power was in knowing, in being prepared when opportunity knocked. Meanwhile, the venue flourished. Every season brought more bookings, more prestige. Couples waited months for a date. Planners called me first. The staff trusted me implicitly, and the building that once struggled now carried a heartbeat steady enough to drown out my father's sneers. And then, one evening, I received another envelope. Heavy, expensive paper. This time, it was an anniversary celebration, Harper and her husband's first year together. Hosted, of course, by my parents. The invitation was gilded, almost ostentatious, as though they needed the shimmer to distract from the fraying edges of their own world. I turned the card over in my hand, a smile tugging at my lips. They were still playing the same game. Appearances, perfection, control, while I had shifted leagues ahead. They thought I was still the outlier, the afterthought. They had no idea I was sitting at the crossroads of their business, their reputation, and their carefully crafted illusions. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. This was an arena. And as I placed the invitation on my desk beside the stack of contracts waiting for my signature, I realized something important. I didn't just have the chance to defend myself anymore. I had the chance to decide the narrative. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one waiting for their approval. They were walking into my shadow, whether they knew it or not. The anniversary party was held at one of the high-end restaurants downtown, the sort of place my parents used to sneer at when they thought it was too modern, but now leaned on for appearances. The invitation had been dripping with pomp, a night of celebration, family, and the strength of legacy. Legacy, that word again. My father loved to wield it like a sword, as though our bloodline alone carried weight enough to excuse every slight. I arrived deliberately late, not sloppy late, but the kind of late that draws eyes when you enter, when conversations briefly still, because people wonder if your absence was intentional. My suit was understated, tailored, but not flashy. I didn't need flash anymore. Quiet confidence is louder than gold when played right. The host ushered me in, and I caught sight of my parents across the room, basking in their usual glow. Dad was already animated, gesturing with his glass, making some point I could guess at from the smirk curling his lips. Mom stood beside him, nodding in agreement, every movement rehearsed. Harper and her husband were at the center table, glowing with newlywed sheen, her hand adorned with a diamond bracelet that caught every glint of light. When they saw me, reactions flickered quickly. Harper's smile wavered, caught between warmth and unease. Mom's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, the way hers always did when she calculated whether my presence helped or hurt the image she wanted. And Dad, he smirked. That smug, polished smirk that had lived in my head for 10 years. "Rowan," he boomed, voice carrying across the tables. "You came after all." The words sounded welcoming, but underneath them lay the same barb. You came, but you're still second tier. I shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and let the evening flow. The dinner courses rolled out, one after another, until the room settled into its rhythm. That was when Dad inevitably rose for his toast. "Family," he declared, lifting his glass. "There's nothing stronger. And tonight, we celebrate not just Harper and her husband, but the foundation we've built. The work, the sacrifices, the name." He let his gaze sweep the room, landing on me as though to remind the audience of his wayward son narrative. "We are proud of our children," he added with mock generosity. "Even when they stumble, we still hope they find their footing." A few polite chuckles. This time, I didn't stay seated. I stood slowly, calm as stone, letting the scrape of my chair draw every eye my way. My heart thudded once, hard, then steadied. "Dad," I said evenly, voice cutting through the room without needing volume. "That's a nice speech. You've always been good at those." I let the words hang. But speeches don't pay debts. Contracts do. The air shifted instantly, like the collective intake of breath before a storm. My father blinked, the smirk faltering just a fraction. "You know," I continued, pulling a slim leather folder from my jacket, "it's funny. A few months ago, a block of properties went under foreclosure. Hale Properties, wasn't it?" Murmurs rippled through the room. I recognized the name, of course. And when the city needed someone reliable to handle the management contract, guess whose firm they called? I laid the folder gently on the table, sliding it toward him. His face reddened, the confident mask cracking. "What is this?" he demanded. "Records," I said simply. "Proof. My team handles those properties now. Yours didn't make the cut." Gasps scattered across the room like shattering glass. Mom's face drained of color. Harper's eyes widened, her hand tightening around her husband's. I leaned slightly closer, my tone still calm, conversational, even polite. "For years, you told me I'd never make it without you, that I'd never own anything real. But Dad, every tenant in that block pays rent to me now. Not you. Me." Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating silence. My father's mouth opened, closed, no words coming out. For the first time in my life, he looked small. I straightened, slipping the keys from my pocket, letting them jingle softly in my hand. "It's not about money anymore," I said, scanning the room. "It's about rewriting the story. You tried to erase me, but I'm still here, stronger. And this time, the truth is on paper." I set the keys down on the folder with a quiet click, then lifted my own glass in a slow, deliberate toast. To family, and to standing on your own. Around the room, some guests raised their glasses hesitantly. Others sat in stunned silence. My mother's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. My father stared at the folder as though it might burn through the table. Harper looked at me with something unreadable, part guilt, part awe, part fear. The power had shifted. Cleanly, irrevocably. But I wasn't finished yet. The silence after my toast seemed to stretch forever. You could almost hear the collective discomfort rattling through the room. Glasses half raised, eyes darting, people trying to decide whether to drink or to watch the wreckage unfold. My father's face, usually so perfectly composed, flushed a dark crimson. He opened his mouth once, twice, as if words might come, but all he managed was a hoarse, "That's not," before cutting himself off. His eyes flicked down at the folder, the damning paperwork laid bare before him. Mom reached for his arm, her diamond bracelet glinting under the chandelier light. "Greg," she hissed softly, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Not here. Sit down." Her gaze darted nervously around the room, reading every stare like it was a scandal waiting to hit the papers. But she wasn't smiling anymore. The carefully painted mask had slipped, and for once, she looked cornered. Harper's husband leaned toward her, whispering something in her ear. Harper, though, kept her eyes on me. She didn't say a word, but the flush on her cheeks betrayed how deeply shaken she was. The perfect daughter, the one they'd always paraded as the shining example, was seeing the foundation of her pedestal crumble in real time. A guest 2 tables over finally broke the tension with a nervous laugh. "Well," he muttered, raising his glass higher, "I'll drink to that." A ripple of chuckles followed, this time more genuine. Other glasses lifted too. One by one, the room aligned with me, not with them. My toast had landed, and theirs was dead on arrival. Dad shoved his chair back abruptly, the scrape echoing across the hardwood floors. "This is nonsense," he snapped, though his voice cracked under the strain. "You think this proves something? You think a stack of papers makes you better than family?" I stayed seated, calm, composed, my glass still in hand. "No," I said quietly. "It proves I don't need your permission to exist. It proves that while you mocked me for building nothing, I was building everything you failed to protect." Gasps and murmurs swept through the tables. My father's hands curled into fists at his sides, but there was no fight left in him. Not here. Not in front of all these witnesses. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the doors, his exit as graceless as it was final. My mother remained frozen for a beat longer, her lips trembling with words she couldn't form. Then, realizing the eyes still on her, she gathered her shawl around her shoulders and followed him out, her heels clicking like nails in a coffin. The room exhaled as though a storm had passed. Conversations resumed hesitantly, laughter re-emerging in careful spurts. But the shift was permanent. The aura of control my parents had wielded over every gathering, every family story, was gone, shattered in a single evening. Harper looked at me across the table, eyes shining with something between sorrow and reluctant respect. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to bridge the years of silence with a single sentence. I didn't press. Not tonight. Instead, I rose slowly, collected the folder and the keys, and slipped them back into my jacket. Then I raised my glass once more, not to my family, but to the room itself. To truth, I said simply. And this time, the cheer that followed was unanimous. As I left the restaurant, the night air cool against my face, I felt no urge to look back. The story my father had told about me for years, the one where I was the failure, the drifter, the dreamer who'd never measure up, was finished, rewritten, and in its place stood something stronger. A man who had been cut off, erased, and humiliated, but who had built himself into someone they could no longer control, no longer define, no longer diminish. I slid into my car, the city lights reflecting off the windshield, and allowed myself the smallest of smiles. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the outsider at their table anymore. I was the one who owned it.